For millions of Christians, Jesus represents the fulfillment of ancient prophecies, the long-awaited Messiah promised in the Hebrew Bible. Yet for centuries, Jewish scholars and skeptics alike have raised a critical point. If Jesus was the Messiah, why did so many key prophecies remain unfulfilled during his life? The Hebrew Bible outlines specific expectations for the Messiah, many of which describe tangible, world-altering events that were meant to transform the lives of the Jewish people and humanity as a whole. These prophecies are not vague spiritual promises, but concrete predictions that history shows did not come to pass. In this video, we'll explore 10 specific prophecies that Jesus, despite the claims of the New Testament, failed to fulfill. Each prophecy, deeply rooted in Jewish messianic tradition, points to a very different outcome than what occurred in Jesus' time. Let's begin with the first prophecy on our list, the rebuilding of the temple. I will establish them and increase their numbers, and I will set my sanctuary among them forever. Then the nations will know that I, the Lord, make Israel holy, when my sanctuary is among them forever. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant. The Hebrew Bible clearly associates the coming of the Messiah with the rebuilding or restoration of the temple in Jerusalem. In Ezekiel chapter 37 verses 26 to 28, we read, "My dwelling place will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people." Similarly, Isaiah chapter 2 verses 2 to 3 describes the temple as a focal point for all nations during the Messianic era. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob." The expectation was clear. The Messiah would rebuild the temple, and it would serve as a center of worship for all humanity. For the Jewish people, this promise was deeply significant, especially after the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. Jesus did not rebuild the temple during his lifetime. Instead, he prophesied its destruction, as recorded in Mark chapter 13, verse 2. "Do you see all these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." Just a few decades after Jesus' death in 70 CE, the Second Temple was indeed destroyed by Roman forces during the Jewish-Roman War. Since then, no temple has been rebuilt on the Temple Mount, and to this day, the site remains occupied by Islamic holy places, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Apologists often argue that Jesus' role as the Messiah was spiritual, not physical, and that he rebuilds the temple metaphorically by establishing a new covenant and creating a spiritual temple within the hearts of believers. However, this interpretation doesn't align with the original prophecies in Ezekiel and Isaiah, which describe a literal physical temple that would stand forever and be a focal point of global worship. Furthermore, Ezekiel chapter 37 verses 26 to 28 explicitly states that this rebuilt sanctuary will be permanent. "My sanctuary will be among them forever." The destruction of the Second Temple contradicts this claim, and no third temple has been established. Why does this matter? The rebuilding of the temple was not a minor expectation. It was a central promise of the Messianic era. For Jewish scholars, the absence of a restored temple remains one of the strongest reasons to reject the notion that Jesus was the prophesied Messiah. The physical restoration of the temple was a tangible sign of divine fulfillment, something that cannot be replaced by spiritual reinterpretation. Historically, many Jewish revolts, including the Bar Kokhba revolt in 132 CE, were driven by the belief that a true Messiah would lead the effort to rebuild the temple. The fact that Jesus neither led such an effort nor saw the temple restored in his time makes it difficult to reconcile his life with this key prophecy. For further study, works such as The Temple, Its Ministry and Services by Alfred Edersheim provide detailed insights into the central role of the temple in Jewish life and messianic expectations. Additionally, archaeological reports on the Temple Mount offer evidence of its historical importance and the impact of its destruction. The prophecy of the Messiah rebuilding the temple remains unfulfilled. Despite claims of spiritual fulfillment by Christian apologists, the literal and physical expectations set forth in the Hebrew Bible have not been realized. This failure challenges the assertion that Jesus met all the requirements of the Messiah. Without a rebuilt temple, one of the core promises of the Messianic era remains unmet, leaving this prophecy unfulfilled to this day. A key expectation of the Messiah in Jewish tradition is the ushering in of an era of universal peace. The Hebrew Bible repeatedly emphasizes that during the Messianic age, war will cease and nations will live in harmony. This is vividly described in Isaiah chapter 2 verse 4. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Micah chapter 4 verses 3-4 echoes this prophecy almost word for word, adding, "Everyone will sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid, for the Lord Almighty has spoken." This vision of a peaceful world, free from conflict and fear, is a cornerstone of messianic prophecy. The Messiah, according to these texts, would establish lasting peace, not just for Israel, but for all humanity. Despite Jesus' life and teachings on peace, the world has continued to experience war, violence, and conflict. Far from witnessing an end to war, the period following Jesus' death saw widespread violence, including the Jewish-Roman Wars, which culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in 70 CE. In fact, wars have persisted throughout history, from ancient conflicts to modern global warfare. The 20th and 21st centuries alone have been marked by 2 world wars, countless regional conflicts, and ongoing geopolitical tensions. Rather than swords being turned into plowshares, nations continue to train for war and engage in armed conflict. Some apologists argue that Jesus' teachings promote inner peace, and that his role as the Messiah is to bring spiritual, not literal, peace. However, this interpretation does not match the explicit language of the prophecies, which describe a tangible, observable peace between nations. The prophets envisioned a world where military institutions would no longer exist, and fear would be eradicated, conditions that have clearly not been met. The promise of universal peace is not a peripheral or symbolic prophecy. It is a defining feature of the Messianic age. For centuries, Jewish thinkers have pointed to the absence of peace as one of the primary reasons for rejecting Jesus as the Messiah. The expectation was clear. The Messiah would bring an end to violence and war, something that has obviously not occurred. By contrast, Christian apologists often appeal to a future second coming, during which they claim Jesus will fulfill these prophecies. However, this idea of a 2-stage messianic mission, first spiritual, then physical, has no basis in the Hebrew Bible. The prophets spoke of a single messianic figure who would bring immediate and lasting change, not someone who would fulfill only part of the mission and return later to complete it. Historically, scholars like Gershom Scholem and Shea J.D. Cohen have noted that Jewish messianic expectations were grounded in real-world changes, not abstract spiritual ideals. The failure to establish peace disqualifies any claimant to the title of Messiah, as peace was seen as a critical marker of the Messianic age. The prophecy of universal peace remains unfulfilled. While Jesus promoted love and peace through his teachings, the world has not seen the kind of lasting harmony described in Isaiah and Micah. Without this defining feature of the Messianic era, the claim that Jesus fulfilled all Messianic prophecies is difficult to sustain. I will gather them from all around and bring them back into their own land. Ezekiel chapter 37 verses 21-22 offers a similar vision. This is what the sovereign Lord says, I will take the Israelites out of the nations where they have gone. Another central expectation of the Messiah is the ingathering of all Jews from exile. According to the Hebrew Bible, the Messiah will reunite the scattered Jewish people and bring them back to their ancestral homeland, restoring Israel as a unified nation. This prophecy is articulated in several passages, including Isaiah chapter 11, verse 12. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four corners of the earth. I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel. There will be one king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms. These prophecies describe a future in which all Jews, wherever they may be, will be gathered back to Israel, and the nation will be restored under a single, divinely appointed ruler. During Jesus' lifetime, most Jews remained dispersed throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. While some lived in Judea, significant Jewish populations thrived in places like Alexandria, Antioch, and Babylon. Jesus did not lead any effort to gather these exiled communities back to Israel. Instead, following his death, the Jewish people experienced further displacement and suffering. In 70 CE, just a few decades after Jesus' crucifixion, the Romans destroyed the Second Temple and exiled many Jews from Jerusalem. The final blow came after the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE, when the Roman Emperor Hadrian expelled most Jews from Judea, renamed the region Provincia Syria Palestina, and barred Jews from entering Jerusalem. This marked the beginning of a long period of Jewish exile, during which the Jewish people were scattered across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. It was not until the 20th century, with the establishment of the modern state of Israel in 1948, that large numbers of Jews began to return to their ancestral homeland. However, even today, a significant portion of the Jewish population lives outside Israel, particularly in the United States, Europe, and Russia. The complete ingathering described in Isaiah and Ezekiel has not occurred. The ingathering of the exiles is not merely symbolic. It is a literal, observable event that was expected to occur in the messianic era. For Jewish scholars, the failure of this prophecy to materialize is a key reason for rejecting Jesus as the Messiah. The Hebrew Bible describes a clear physical return of all Jews to the land of Israel, something that has yet to happen. Christian apologists often argue that this prophecy is being fulfilled gradually, pointing to the modern return of Jews to Israel as evidence. However, this interpretation conflicts with the immediacy implied in the original text. The prophets envisioned a complete and swift return under the leadership of the Messiah, not a protracted historical process lasting millennia. Moreover, the current state of Israel does not meet the conditions described in Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 21 to 22, where the prophecy promises that the restored nation will be ruled by a single king, never to be divided again. Modern Israel is a secular democracy, not a monarchy, and remains politically divided both internally and externally. The prophecy of the Messiah gathering all Jews back to Israel remains unfulfilled. While the return of many Jews to Israel in the modern era is significant, it does not match the immediate and total ingathering described in the Hebrew Bible. Without the fulfillment of this key prophecy, the claim that Jesus completed the messianic mission is incomplete. One of the most inspiring prophecies about the messianic era is the promise that the Messiah will bring universal knowledge of God. According to the Hebrew Bible, this era will mark a time when all nations acknowledge the God of Israel and worship him in unity. Isaiah 11:9 captures this vision. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Isaiah 11:9. Zechariah 14:9 reinforces this expectation. The Lord will be king over the whole earth. On that day there will be one Lord, and his name the only name. Zechariah 14:9. The prophecy is clear. In the Messianic era, there will be universal recognition of God, and the entire world will unite in his worship. Despite the spread of Christianity, the world has not reached the state of universal knowledge and worship of God, as described in these passages. Today, billions of people follow various religions including Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and many indigenous belief systems. Many others identify as atheists or agnostics. The promised era of universal worship simply has not materialized. Furthermore, the knowledge of God in the context of these prophecies refers specifically to the God of Israel as understood in Judaism, with adherence to the Torah and its commandments. While Christianity has spread widely, its interpretation of God and religious practice differs significantly from that described in the Hebrew Bible. Christian apologists argue that this prophecy is being fulfilled spiritually through the spread of Christianity and the teachings of Jesus. However, this interpretation deviates from the original intent of the prophecies, which clearly describe a literal, physical transformation of the world. Isaiah and Zechariah envisioned a time when all people, regardless of their background, would come to Jerusalem to worship the God of Israel. This has not happened. Additionally, many non-Christian nations continue to worship their own deities or follow secular ideologies. Far from uniting in the worship of one God, the world remains religiously diverse and divided. This prophecy is not just about religious belief, it's about a complete transformation of global society. The expectation was that the Messiah would bring about a world where conflict over religion no longer exists, because all people would worship the same God in the same way. The failure of this prophecy to materialize is significant because it challenges the core idea that the messianic era has already begun. Jewish scholars emphasize that the Messiah's role is to bring about real, observable change in the world. The current state of religious plurality and conflict stands in stark contrast to the peaceful, unified world envisioned by Isaiah and Zechariah. For this reason, Jewish tradition holds that the true Messiah has not yet come. The prophecy of spreading the knowledge of God to all nations remains unfulfilled. Despite the influence of Jesus and the spread of Christianity, the world has not reached the state of universal worship described in the Hebrew Bible. Without this key transformation, the Messianic era has clearly not arrived, making it difficult to claim that Jesus fulfilled this prophecy. In Jewish tradition, the Messiah is expected to be a powerful political and military leader who will restore Israel's sovereignty and lead it to victory over its enemies. This expectation is drawn from several biblical prophecies, including Jeremiah 23, 5-6. "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved and Israel will live in safety. This is the name by which he will be called, the Lord our righteous Savior." Jeremiah 23, 5-6, NIV. Isaiah 9, 6-7 also presents a vision of the Messiah as a ruler. "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever." Isaiah 9, 6-7, NIV. These passages describe a king who will reign over a united Israel, restore the throne of David, and ensure the nation's safety and prosperity. Jesus did not fulfill these expectations. Rather than being a political or military leader, he focused on spiritual teachings, emphasizing love, forgiveness, and humility. He did not lead a rebellion against Roman rule, restore Jewish sovereignty, or establish a kingdom on David's throne. Instead, he was arrested by Roman authorities, tried, and executed by crucifixion, a fate far removed from the victorious ruler described in these prophecies. Far from ushering in an era of independence and peace, the period following Jesus' death was marked by turmoil and conflict for the Jewish people. In 66 CE, just a few decades after his crucifixion, the Jewish-Roman War began, leading to the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in 70 CE. This was followed by the Bar Kokhba revolt in 132 CE, which resulted in the further decimation of the Jewish population and their expulsion from Judea. Some Christian apologists argue that Jesus will fulfill these political and military prophecies during a future second coming. However, this idea is not supported by the Hebrew Bible, which presents the Messiah as fulfilling all his roles in a single immediate mission. There is no mention of a two-stage messianic role in the texts of Jeremiah or Isaiah. The Messiah was expected to bring about real observable change in his own time, not at an unspecified point in the distant future. The failure to fulfill this prophecy is crucial because it directly contradicts one of the central roles of the Messiah as envisioned in Jewish scripture. The Messiah was not merely a spiritual figure. He was meant to be a king who would lead Israel to freedom, restore its monarchy, and bring lasting peace and justice. By focusing solely on spiritual matters and not assuming any political or military leadership, Jesus did not meet this fundamental criterion. This is a key reason why Jewish tradition does not recognize him as the Messiah. For the Jewish people, a Messiah who does not restore Israel's sovereignty cannot be the one foretold by the prophets. Historically, Jewish messianic movements have often centered around leaders who were seen as potential fulfillers of this prophecy. Leaders such as Simon Bar Kokhba were embraced by their followers precisely because they offered political and military leadership. The fact that Jesus did not offer either underscores the gap between the biblical messianic vision and his actual life and mission. The prophecy of the Messiah as a political and military leader remains unfulfilled. Jesus did not restore Israel's sovereignty, lead it to victory, or establish a kingdom on David's throne. While Christian theology reinterprets the Messiah's role as primarily spiritual, this interpretation does not match the literal expectations outlined in the Hebrew Bible. Without the fulfillment of this crucial prophecy, the case for Jesus as the Messiah remains incomplete. In the Hebrew Bible, the Messiah is described as someone who will live a long life, prosper, and have descendants. This expectation is derived from passages such as Isaiah 53:10, which, depending on interpretation, reads, "Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer, and though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand." Isaiah 53:10, NIV. Additionally, the messianic figure described in other prophecies is often portrayed as a king who will reign for a prolonged period, ensuring stability and prosperity for Israel. Jesus did not live a long life. According to historical and biblical accounts, he was crucified at a relatively young age, traditionally believed to be around 33 years old. Furthermore, Jesus did not have any biological descendants. The Gospels and Christian tradition consistently depict Jesus as unmarried and without children, contradicting the prophecy that the Messiah would see his offspring. Apologists often argue that the term offspring in Isaiah 53:10 refers to spiritual descendants, believers who follow Jesus. However, this interpretation strays from the literal meaning of the word offspring, zera in Hebrew, which typically refers to biological children in the context of Hebrew scripture. The text suggests that the Messiah will have literal descendants and a prolonged life, neither of which applies to Jesus. The phrase prolong his days also indicates that the Messiah will live a long life. In contrast, Jesus' life was cut short by his crucifixion. This failure to fulfill the prophecy undermines the claim that Jesus is the Messiah, as a long life and descendants were key aspects of the messianic role. The expectation of a long life and descendants is not a minor detail. It represents the Messiah's role in ensuring the continuation of the Davidic line and the stability of Israel. The Hebrew Bible portrays the Messiah as a figure who will live to see his legacy flourish. Without biological descendants, the idea of perpetuating a dynasty or ensuring long-term stability becomes impossible. For Jewish scholars, the failure to fulfill these criteria is a major reason for rejecting Jesus as the Messiah. The Hebrew Bible presents the Messiah not only as a spiritual leader, but also as someone who will establish a physical legacy, ensuring Israel's future. Christian theology's reinterpretation of these prophecies as spiritual metaphors, rather than literal promises, does not align with the plain meaning of the texts. Isaiah's use of the terms offspring and prolong his days strongly implies tangible outcomes, not symbolic or spiritualized interpretations. The prophecy of the Messiah living a long life and having descendants remains unfulfilled. Jesus' early death and lack of biological offspring contradict the literal expectations outlined in the Hebrew Bible. Without these key elements, the claim that Jesus fulfilled all messianic prophecies is incomplete. In Jewish tradition, one of the Messiah's primary roles is to uphold, reinforce, and magnify the Torah, Jewish law. The Hebrew Bible consistently emphasizes that the Messiah will lead the Jewish people in strict adherence to the commandments. Isaiah 42:21 highlights this expectation. The Lord was pleased for the sake of his righteousness to make the law great and glorious. Isaiah 42:21. Ezekiel 37:24 also reinforces the idea of a Messiah who will guide Israel in observing the Torah. My servant David will be king over them, and they will all have one shepherd. They will follow my laws and be careful to keep my decrees. Ezekiel 37:24. The Messiah was expected to strengthen observance of the Torah, ensuring that all Jews follow God's commandments faithfully. Rather than reinforcing adherence to the Torah, Jesus' teachings led to significant reinterpretations and, in many cases, the abandonment of key aspects of Jewish law. The Gospels contain several instances where Jesus appears to challenge or reinterpret the Torah. For example, in Matthew 5:17-18, Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished." Matthew 5:17-18, NIV. While this statement seems to affirm the Torah, subsequent Christian doctrine diverges significantly from Jewish law. The Apostle Paul, a key figure in early Christianity, explicitly taught that observance of the Torah was no longer necessary for salvation. In Galatians 3:24-25, Paul writes, "So the law was our guardian until Christ came that we might be justified by faith. Now that this faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian." As Christianity developed, many of the Torah's commandments, such as dietary laws, Sabbath observance, and circumcision, were either reinterpreted or abandoned altogether. This stands in stark contrast to the messianic expectation that the Messiah would uphold and strengthen the Torah. The Torah is central to Jewish identity and religious practice. The expectation that the Messiah would uphold and magnify the law reflects the Jewish belief in the Torah's eternal relevance. By leading to a reinterpretation and partial abandonment of the Torah, Jesus' teachings failed to meet this core expectation. Jewish scholars point out that the Messiah's mission, according to the Hebrew Bible, is to guide the Jewish people in greater adherence to God's commandments, not to replace or diminish them. The failure to fulfill this role disqualifies Jesus from being the Messiah in the eyes of Jewish tradition. Christian theology's interpretation of Jesus as fulfilling the law by superseding it with a new covenant is seen by many Jews as a fundamental deviation from the Torah's enduring authority. The promise in Isaiah and Ezekiel is clear. The Messiah will strengthen the Torah, not replace it with a new system of belief. The prophecy of the Messiah upholding and strengthening the Torah remains unfulfilled. Instead of reinforcing adherence to Jewish law, Jesus' teachings led to a significant departure from it, resulting in the formation of a new religion, Christianity, that diverges from core Jewish practices. Without this essential fulfillment, the claim that Jesus met all messianic criteria falls short. If you enjoy our content, we'd love your support. By joining one of our channel memberships, you help us continue creating videos like this one while gaining access to some amazing perks. As a member, you'll unlock exclusive content available only to supporters, earn loyalty badges to show off in comments and live chats, and enjoy priority responses to your comments, shoutouts, and more. The best part? Memberships start at just $2.99 a month, less than a cup of coffee. Even small contributions make a big difference for the PJ Bible TV team in covering production costs and delivering the content you love. And if you're not ready to become a channel member today but still want to support us, there are other ways to help. Engaging with our videos is a tremendous way to show your support. By taking just a few moments to like the video, share it with friends, family, or on social media, and leave a comment, you're telling the YouTube algorithm to share our content with more people. Your support, no matter how you choose to show it, means the world to us. Thank you for being part of the PJ Bible TV community.